Hey gang, Mark Sweeney here from Austin Dental Spa in beautiful, hot Austin, Texas. If you've tuned in before, you know this is called Wisdom Wednesday. We do it around 5:30 every Wednesday afternoon on Facebook, and we try to bring you some recent scientific information that has usually to do with dentistry, but sometimes, like today, it has to do with just your overall health and well-being. And we also have a theme every month. But what we're going to talk about today, I think you're going to really like these subjects. I also give a health tip at the end. But our subject today is happiness. Who would have thought that one of the research shows that in order to be happy, you had to quit trying to be happy? But before we get to that, I know that sounds kind of crazy. I'll explain it in more detail. Our theme for the last Wednesday of the month, the whole month, we've had Fly High in July. And this is our last week in July. I cannot believe tomorrow is August 1st. But here we are. And so we're flying high in July by giving you tips and pointers that you can use right away to make life better and to live a happier life. That's what we're talking about today, is happiness. So let's dive into it. There's actually a book called Happiness by Design. Look it up on Amazon. A professor, Dr. Paul Dolan at the London School of Economics, which is a pretty prestigious school, he spent most of his life writing on the topic of happiness. And what he said is that one way to achieve happiness is to focus less on it. Instead of focusing on the results of happiness and seeing happiness as an end result, his attitude is, and his research shows, that you have to have two things. You have to have purpose, and it has to give you pleasure. Because if you have purpose, then you've got a direction to go, and we'll get more into each one of these two things. And he also found through his research that if it's not pleasurable to you, then you're not going to do it. So you've got to have those two things. There's also two main roadblocks that he found in his happiness. First, pursuing happiness directly and exclusively can cause people to care only about themselves, which could be called selfish or even narcissistic, which is a hot term these days. Second, focusing on happiness can, and this is the ironic part, focusing solely on trying to be happy can actually make you severely unhappy, because you're always going to see somebody that you think is happier than you are and wonder what you're doing wrong. So how can you avoid these two things? Well, like we mentioned earlier, there's two things. One, his research was do good, or find some reason, some purpose to be alive. And second, his attitude was focus. So do good and then focus. So we're going to talk about doing good, first of all. And it's funny, I read an article earlier this week that I'll segue into that. But he said the fastest way to happiness is find something that you can do to help other people. Because helping others makes us feel happy, in part because helping others gives us a purpose. It makes us feel purposeful. And thus we should find a balance between the pleasure and the purpose. As I mentioned before, if it's not pleasurable, you're not going to do it. And if it's not purposeful, then there's really no point. Earlier this week on social media, I read about John D. Rockefeller, who in the early 1900s was the world's first billionaire. He was actually a multi-millionaire at the time, $340 million, but by today's standards, it would be a billionaire if you took today's money. This is like 1913. He was wealthy. He owned Standard Oil. He started Standard Oil and was the largest oil refiner in the United States. So in the early 1900s, that was huge. And you know about Rockefellers and the Rockefeller Foundation. Well, I'm going to talk about that because by the time he was 53 years old, the richest man in the world was also bedridden. He was sick. He had a team of doctors that couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, and he just laid in bed all day and was miserable. And he came to realize, as he's laying on what he thought was his deathbed at 53 years old, that he needed to start a foundation and give all the money away because he wasn't going to be able to take it with him. So he started the Rockefeller Foundation and started giving money to charities and to build hospitals and to treatment centers for cancer and all kinds of other diseases that were unknown how to have a cure for back in the early 1900s. And gradually, an amazing thing happened. He started to get well. The doctors couldn't explain it. By the time he was in his 60s, he was up and moving around again, running his foundation, which was all focused on giving money away. Andrew Carnegie, same story. He achieved so much wealth that he created a foundation and started giving it all away. He said, I spent the first half of my life making money. I'm going to spend the second half giving it all away. John D. Rockefeller lived into his late 90s, and the Rockefeller Foundation exists still today because of his idea to start giving to others instead of hoarding it all for himself. So that's what can create happiness, and that's exactly the subject of our talk today. Is it selfish to try to find happiness by helping others? Well, no. Part of this doctor's research from University College of London is that, in fact, research has shown that charitable acts have no personal benefit actively discourage people from participating in them, which is where the pleasure part comes in. So you actually have the reverse effect if you're not really enjoying it. So you got to find something that you enjoy doing for other people and then focus on it. And he points out, focus on the experience, not focus on being happy, because if you focus on the happiness, suddenly you're not happy anymore. If you're listening to some good music, focus on the music. Don't focus on whether it's making you happy or not, and you're more likely to become happy from listening to this great music. So to recap all that craziness, it really boils down to two things. In order to increase your happiness, you need these two things. Spend some time identifying what activities bring you pleasure and purpose, and find the right balance between those two feelings. And then need to pay attention to those activities themselves rather than on how those activities make us feel. So, you just got a lot of information about how to go out there in the world and find happiness by not making that your goal. My health tip of the week: if you have pets, aren't you happier when you have pets? I know I got a dog 3 years ago, and it changed my life. It's a much more of a PIA to get up and take him out in the mornings and take him out last thing at night and to feed him. But it did change something in me that I had a new purpose in life to make sure that he's okay, because he's totally dependent on me feeding him and making sure that he's doing okay. So this is an interesting study. These researchers took real rabbits and turtles, not very sexy animals, and then they took stuffed ones, rabbits and turtles, and they took them to old folks' homes and let the elderly people who were borderline diagnosed as depressed, and they let some of them pet the live turtles and rabbits, and they had some of them pet the stuffed ones. Well, the stuffed ones, kind of the control group or placebo group, had no change in their depression levels. The ones that petted rabbits and turtles, I don't even know how to pet a turtle, but the ones that petted the rabbits and turtles had a noticeable increase in 3 weeks in alleviating some of their depression. They felt better about the world just from petting rabbits and turtles. Imagine what it would be if you had a cute little dog. Horses have been long known to be very sensitive animals, and another study showed that kids suffering from PTSD got better and improved their symptoms by walking horses and grooming them, which is on everybody's mind right now with the Olympics going on over in Paris and all the equestrian events. And finally, this was a crazy one. I couldn't believe this. A 2016 study found, again with elderly people who are borderline depressed, found that if they put 5 crickets, this is crickets, little insects, in a jar, 5 crickets in a jar, and they had to take care of them, I guess feed them and just watch them while they're crawling around, but people were in charge of making sure the crickets stayed alive. Those people got less depressed than the people who didn't get crickets. So what do I hear from that? Crickets. Anyway, that's my Wisdom Wednesday for today, and I hope you've gotten some useful information out of that. I will look forward to seeing you next Wednesday for a new version, August issue of Wisdom Wednesday.